Okay, thank you for tuning in to Stampscaping 101. This is the final lesson in the lab. This is the third of three lessons that we've gone into where we've utilized value to kind of push the depth within the scene, the selective use of kind of our impression values in terms of how much ink is applied to our stamps and how much ink is removed before making our impression. This is an example of the type of monochromatic scene where I've kind of gone through the concepts of what we're doing, and this is, in this lesson right here, this video, what I've done is I've taken that same composition but just introduced the use of hue, greens, blues, and grays into this composition right here to further kind of emphasize the point of kind of your selective use of value, okay? If this is the first lesson that you've tuned into and you haven't seen the previous two, the only thing I'm talking about is instead of always just stamping out your imagery in one color or inking it up and then utilizing that full strength of your ink, utilizing maybe the second impression or something like that, or wiping off some of your ink off of your stamps so that when you give your impression it gives a more varied kind of value scale in the impression itself, which gives you a head start kind of in defining lighting within your scene here. So you can really utilize this really easy kind of process to really push the usage of all of your stamps kind of one step further. And the same thing goes with your ink pads too, utilizing the full strength of them or utilizing the half strength of them, or all kinds of different variations within a given color. For example, like these trees back here are using this green right here and mixed in with a little bit of this grain, but you can see there's a big value change from the top of the tree to the bottom because I really removed a lot of the ink off the bottom. So when I stamp it out, it varies from kind of darker to lighter on the bottom, and that way we got kind of a head start in our scene lighting, okay? And it's just a really easy process and concept to apply. Anyways, if you choose to watch the video, I hope you enjoy it. If you choose to stamp along with this one, I hope you enjoy that too, and I hope you can really enjoy the results from kind of this concept of stamp ink applications. Okay, we've gone through some different aspects of value in regards to creating space between your different layers of imagery and visual depth in regards to kind of the illusion of light, okay? Things usually farther off in the distance are lighter, things that are closer are darker. Not always, but just in general, you could, as in with the last lesson, we've seen where we can add depth to a foreground too, which kind of push and pulls space within that given area. But we've just been doing this in grayscale. Let's try it with color now, and we'll see where these different aspects of the concept can apply to a multi-tonal hue scene here, okay? Let's go with the same imagery, alright? But we'll just add a little bit more richness in terms of the variation of hue here. Okay, so I'm adding black to this. I like to kind of give my... If it's a mid-ground scene, even if it's going to be colored, I do like to add a variation of, or variations of hue into it. But I do like to kind of have it just in general being fairly dark in space, because even if stamped in black, like these areas up on the rocks are going to be light because they're stippled. But the areas in the trees can use some variation, degrees of variation. So I'm hitting it with some green like this. I'm just kind of scumbling it around. I'll bring it into the shadows as well, like there's a strong kind of mirror-like reflection. It's all up to you how you want to handle that, though. You can do it in, you know, different blues or something like that. It's just a mark. These are just markers that I'm using, and as I'm kind of going off and I'm kind of wiping a little bit, so I'm kind of wiping some color off too. And I can put some of this in my rocks too. That might be nice. If you have a gray pen or something like that. Now, these are dye-based pens. If all you have are alcohol pens, you don't want to mix that type of thing, like alcohol markers and dye-based inks. It wouldn't work. They would dry instantly. So, but if you have you know, your Marvies, Tombos, Laplumes, or anything like that, that would do. So anyways, hopefully we have a little bit of variation here. Sometimes I don't remove enough, or my black pad is really super juicy and my pens are kind of medium dry, so I do a lot of kind of that those markings on there, and I stamp it out and it looks all black. You know, you can't hardly see anything because the pens didn't really apply as much as the pad was super wet. Okay, now I'm wiping off some of the bottom here, and that's so that this area down here transitions a little bit. So we're kind of taking some of the lessons from the previous two video lessons here, and we're applying some of those techniques to that. Okay, now I'm going to stamp this down a little bit lower because I have used the clouds in my last lesson. So if I can have these background trees, the mountain, and some more clouds in the top, I'll do that. So I'm kind of bringing this down a little bit farther down on the composition, just to leave more space at the top here. So we'll see what we can do about adding it all in there. Okay, so good. We have that variation in there. You can see the greens and whatnot, and we can see the kind of where I've wiped off the bottom. We can see some of that color down here. So, I mean, it's subtle. I mean, you can just stamp that in black and, you know, 100% of your time, and it's going to look fine. But it is kind of nice having a little touch of hue in there, especially if it's going to be kind of a daytime scene where the colors of the various objects, the different colors of the various objects, will stand out. Okay, now here's where we start getting into some variation here. Here's some of these trees in the background here. If I stamp them in black, they're going to be darker than my foreground right here. This is all going to end up being kind of more of a midground once I do end up using a foreground, but as it exists right now, this is my foreground stamp. So I need to stamp this in something lighter than that background. So let's go with a green that I believe will be lighter than that one. Well, let's not go with this one. This one's deteriorating. This one's good for kind of inking up, but like a stylus tool or something. But this one's this pad, 20-year-old pad's disintegrating. Okay, this is just a green here. All right, now I believe that this is going to be too dark. Let's do a test print of it. I just re-inked it too, not too long ago, so it is fairly dark. All right, so let's do something like this. Let's ink it up. Okay, really juicy. I almost inked up too much. Okay, and then let's go on with my, I believe this is, I need to verify whether this is olive green or not. I think the 15 is olive. Okay, so that's that color right there. So it's probably going to be a little bit lighter than that, but probably not light enough. So what I'll do is I will blot it off, and then we'll wipe off the bottom. Let's go about a ½ inch, but let's do it more off the bottom, okay? So I'm running, you know, I'm wiping off a good amount of it. And then as I move up about a ½ inch, I'm taking off a little bit less, and then about an inch up, I'm taking off a little bit less. So I'm using less pressure as I go across here, okay? Take a pretty good amount, maybe a ½ inch, like where you're taking off. I'm guessing 90% off the really bottom edge and about 80% off about a 1/4 inch, 60 to about maybe 50% off the mid range of it. I mean, you don't have to be so exact, okay? Now remember, we did stamp it off once too, so we'll see how light this got. I mean, I don't want it too light because I still have some other things, you know, farther off in the distance that still need to come. But see how my trees here in the foreground, they stand out, right? And you can see where it transitions from light to darker up there. Okay. All right, now let's see if we can do the same thing and kind of replicate that impression. If it doesn't replicate it perfectly, don't worry about it. I'm talking about in terms of inking and blotting off with the same pressure and removal of ink. There's a lot of, you know, steps in there, but they're simple steps, okay? I just ran some streaks down here like that. I'm stamping it off pretty decently. Now that one, I took off probably more ink. It's either that or I applied more ink on here to begin with. Okay, removing the ink. Not 100%, okay? That's the big thing. You want it to transition. You don't want there to just be a straight line there, you know, if I removed it with a wet paper towel. So dry paper towel, okay? And like so. Okay. So we have background trees in there. Isn't that nice? Okay. And why don't we go for another impression here? I just want some subtle impressions, okay? I don't want to go for anything too distinct. Okay. I just want a little bit of color down there to replicate what's going on up here. Because I do have some reeds to put in here, so I don't want to obscure this area too much, okay? Alright, so let's take a look at this mountain in the background. What color should we do it? Let's do it in like a... Let's do it in a gray. Okay. It's several miles away. It's kind of a bare, above the tree line type of image, so maybe, I don't know, 12,000 feet high or something. 14 or out in Colorado, whatever. Alright, let's do a little bit of variation in it, okay? We used some of this blue down in these rocks down here. Why don't we blend in a little bit of blue onto it, you know, just for some variation. Something like that, so it's kind of gray, bluish. Let's kind of blot this off and see. I think I can almost go straight on there, but let's wipe some off like so. Wiping off a pretty good amount off the bottom portion, okay? So that it transitions from strong to weak. In terms of the impression value. Okay, so see my trees are still darker than the distant mountain, okay? And I can come upside down like this for a little bit of that mirrored impression. It's very subtle, but nevertheless it's there. Will it show up in the end? I don't know. May not. If it doesn't, no big deal. If it does, then we have the benefit of you know, a slight I don't know, mirror-like quality. Okay? Alright, so here we have this cloud. Where's the cloud supposed to be? Behind the mountains, so let's make it pretty light. Don't go with like a navy blue or something like that. Go with a very light value blue, right? So this one's a salvia blue, it's very light. Mementos Summer Skies, super light. I don't know. Alright, so this pad is pretty juicy, but let me remove some of the ink off the perimeter. Don't be gentle with the removal of ink. Go, you know, go pretty firm with it. Okay, which way do I want to go with this? Yeah, okay. If I just do it like this, coming down. I don't need to mask anything off. If I go like this and it's coming from behind the mountain, then I'll need to mask off the mountain. Let's just do it, since this is the final piece in this lesson here, at least. You don't need to do a super careful mask. Sometimes, well, okay, I did a careful mask once, okay, and I kept it here, and it's of this rocky peak, so let's go ahead and use it. I do use careful masks once in a blue moon, especially if I still had it. And if I stamp that out and I cut it out just of a scrap piece of paper, I keep it right next to me, so I won't have to do it again. Okay. Alright, so salvia blue, just a real light blue here. One person years ago mentioned they don't know if they want this cloud because it's a real, you know, they don't know if they want a stormy cloud. And, you know, I mean, it's completely, I get where they're coming from. If you stamp this cloud out in black, then there's a lot more contrast to it. If you stamp it out in baby blue, it's light and billowy and, I don't know, kind of the most friendly and inviting cloud you'll ever see in terms of the softness of it. Okay? Alright, so there's my mask. It's one of the few times you'll ever see me use a mask in there. Let's get a little bit of, I don't know, you can't really see it at all. I was going to say, get a little bit of that reflection down in the water. You can't see it at all. I'm not anal about my usage of stamps, as you can see. Everyone thinks that this is such a technical process sometimes that see the end result, but I don't know, if you've watched these videos, I would hope that you would gather that it's not kind of a fussy process whatsoever. It's, you know, but I get it though, you know, when you see kind of an end result and the designs are very intricate and I don't know, very, very meticulous looking in terms of the individual imagery and just how everything blends together. That's what people tend to think, which that's what we really want people to think, you know, if they see our finished pieces, right? We don't want to make a card for someone and for them to take a look at it and say, oh, that's, you know, how easy that must have been, you know? They wanted to think, you know, that you really, you know, labored over it, and I don't know. You don't want them to think that it, you know, to get the impression, you know, it's not that kind of the reaction we want, you know, how, you know, what a simple card, or what a simple, you know, piece you've made there, right? But in actuality, as far as the process goes, now there are going to be some kind of real intricate scenes that we do, and we're exploring new compositions. People are doing full-page scenes and bringing the stamps together in a certain way for the first time. Yeah, you know. But, you know, for most of my cards, it's not like that. And people say, well, oh, it's just so easy for you. Well, if you make the process kind of a nice and easy one, if you get the basics down, you can apply the basics to everything that you do. And it really doesn't take long to get the basics down if you kind of follow, you know, some certain concepts. And that applies to different media out there as well as this one right here. You know, we can stamp this out on matte cardstock, and instead of using dye-based ink and blending it in like this or applying it to the card, it could be pastels or something like that. Colored pencil. Alright, what color am I doing? I'm doing summer sky here. I think I should probably move on, because this summer sky of mine is really, really the dry. It's super light too, which makes it a really good card to, or color to start off with. Where do you apply it? I'm applying it to the sky, I'm applying it to the mountain in the background, I'm applying it a little bit to this area down behind the trees, and I'm applying it to some of these rocks, and in the shadows of the rocks like this. Where do you add your shadows and tones, well, you just apply it to the areas where there's darker values in terms of the shading of the design. And you can just follow that same shading convention that I've drawn into the design. So it's a good head start. Doesn't mean that's exactly where you have to apply it meticulously at all, you know, but just in general. So see down here, like at the base of these rocks right here. Basically, the tops of the rocks are the areas that are a little bit lighter in hue because they're the top surfaces of something, and if it's not something that's being top lit, you know, kind of the vertical sides of it, just like the stamp, are going to be darker on the side, see, than the top when it's being top lit. Again, that's the same thing that's happening on these rocks down here. See down here, I'm kind of darkening the shadows. Go with a real light touch. Okay, now I'm using kind of more of the side, the edge of my color box stylus tool. That's one of the biggest technique things, okay? Most of the time, okay, this is what a lot of people don't get when they're first doing this too. I should reiterate this more, but most of the time I'm kind of working on this edge right here of my stylus tool. I'm not using the flat part of it, okay? I have it on its edge, and then as I want a thicker area, then I kind of rotate it down where it's coming in more contact with the surface of this. So this is what it kind of looks like. I'm on edge, the edges right here, and then, okay, and then see how it's kind of tapered like that because I'm using the edge and then I'm working it, and I just keep doing that. And then what I do is I'm slowly rotating around like that. So I get this tapered kind of flow, but this is much easier to apply than that because there's so much more contact, okay? And then let's flip this around, and I'm coming into it like this. Now, this isn't all the time. Like I might have some larger areas to fill in, though. I'll use the whole tip like that, okay? That's what you can do too for any kind of applicator that you're using. I've shown videos on how to utilize things like cosmetic sponges as well. So let me see if this is dry here. Alright, let's use the cosmetic sponge right here. And see how this has all these sharp edges like that? I'm just using that edge like that and blending in, okay? Use a light touch, and in order to get your values darker, just use more repetition, okay? These aren't the ideal things to use for me, but they're not bad, and anything's ideal if this is the best that you can find, you know. And it's available, and they're also cheap too. But you can see how this works out just fine. You get the hang of it too, you know. I mean, I don't use these too often, so you know, whenever I use them, it's like the first time I've used them in months or whatever, because the stylus tools are just much more convenient and you know, ergonomic. And I'm all into ergonomics, but let's say they stop making these and I can't get them anymore. You know, if this is what I have to use, I'm not going to miss it, you know, the other one. I might think about it, you know what I mean? But I kind of move on, and it's like, okay, I don't think about it anymore. If this is what I have to use, then I'll use it and I'll make the best of it. So, alright, but see that? This is, you know, a pretty good application of it, using the stylus tool, the cosmetic sponge like this, okay? When you're using kind of any kind of sponge applicator or a soft applicator, think about kind of, you don't want these things to, you don't want to think about this like it being like a slathering of paint or something like that, like a painting your walls in your house or something like that, where you're using those foam pads to, apply a big slathering of paint, okay? Think about this more in terms of almost like dry brushing on some ink, where this is very dry, and you're just kind of applying a small amount at any given time. Actually, see, I'm getting used to this now. Even though this is very square here, and, there's a somewhat of a pretty good chance of me getting those edges, but see, if I kind of just stay on an area and I kind of keep a lighter touch, kind of the thing that I kind of relate the touch of the ink application to is just imagine as though we were using some kind of like a non-toxic ink that, is being used like for, I don't know, makeup or something like that. And imagine you're applying something to a child's face, okay? That's about the amount of pressure you want to use. You don't want to scrub on there, and, it's going to hurt, so we just kind of, we're lightly dabbing this on, okay? And that's the feeling of it. If you want a soft and light application, then use this, use your tools and accordingly. Okay? So now we have all this blue in here now. And it's a pretty light application of it, okay? Okay, see, I've left some of my little areas of my rocks light, as if it is capturing some of that light. I've left some of my mountain light, but look at the different values here now, okay? Things look a little bit, farther off in the distance, the lighter they are. Now, we're going to have to work through all the tones that we've used in here in our toning process in order for this kind of to make kind of more visual sense in terms of spatially. So we're going to have to blend in some of those gray tones and some of these green tones into the mix, okay? All right. Let's go over to the gray. Let me just use my same applicators here, okay? So we're going to bring in the colors that we've used in our imagery into the toning process, because what we're saying is that if that is that color right there, then that's the color that's kind of, that's the light that's bouncing off of that object and reflecting back to us. So let's put some of this light, this color, into the shading of the scene. All right, I think you get the point of these tools right here, right? I can switch back to my stylus. Well, this is not too bad. I'm really getting the feel of it, as always happens when I do work with it. Okay, this is just more comfortable. It's like a pen in my hand. Okay. And again, this is just the gray. This is the number 12 Marvy color. Now, I haven't forgot about the foreground. I'll add that in there. Let me get a little bit of gray behind those trees, just a slight. That little light area will be kind of, I think, like in a reflective mist or something like that. The scene. Okay. It's kind of making our blue up there, a little bit gray blue, or blue gray. kind of starting to come together a little more, I think, right? Doesn't it kind of, I don't know. When you utilize hue and values within a given hue is the color, okay? Anytime you use those and various values, I feel it kind of makes the piece almost kind of shimmer, because that light is reflecting off of things and kind of bouncing back to our eye. And I think that it I don't know, what's the thing? It resonates or something like that in light. You know, when things are kind of defined by light within a given space. Photographers think about this type of thing. I'm not a photographer, but you know, they know that they're dealing with light, you know, and things are reflecting off objects. They're not, you know, it's not the actual object, it's the light kind of reflecting off of it. So the quality, you know, the tonal qualities of things are, you know, that's what the photographers are looking for. They're looking for that light, the right light, to capture kind of the essence of a, you know, a given object. A lot of times they like, you know, that, you know, the golden hour. It's when, you know, very colorful light is reflecting off of the different objects within a given, you know, composition view. All right, I'm bringing in some of this green. Now, can you tell there's some of this green down here? There's a greenish tinge. I've used it more up here than down here, so you can see there's a little bit of a difference. But see how it kind of relates to this area up here? And I'm just going on with this olive green here. There wasn't a pad in this color, so I'm just using this green here because I stamped out my imagery in a lot of this green here. So let's bring that same green into it, okay? So green is reflecting off that tree and coming back through this moisture in the air. Everything looks a little bit hazy, so, you know, there's that tinge of that hue in the air. I gotta be careful that I don't use too much of it, because I don't want it to look, you know, like a muddy bog or something like that. Maybe that would be good for the, you know, the bayou stamps or something like that. But for this one, I don't want that. And now I do want a little bit of this, touch of this on these rocks, because that could be, it could show that there's a little bit of a green light being reflected off those rocks, or it could be something like moss on the rocks or something, you know, of that sort. Okay. Bring some of that green down on our water. You know, it could be somewhat reflective of the types of colors that we see above it, and reflections and whatnot. Okay. Alright, so we've used gray, blue, and green. What other colors have we stamped in here? Well, we stamped black, right? For the Lakeside Cove. I did go into it and gave it kind of a multi-tonal impression, but I did use black in there, so let's go and use black. So we're just using the colors that we stamped our images out in, okay? And we'll use that same hue to kind of tie things together, all those hues to tie things together. Okay, see? That black right in here, here's the black used here, and there's none of there. See how it's kind of anchoring that down a little bit more? It's because it's the same color that I used in that impression there. Okay. But now see, we're starting to, well, I mean, we benefited from our multi-valued impressions in terms of creating depth, but now we're really kind of bringing them all together. Now it's a lot faster to bring everything together in my kind of monochromatic pieces, because all I had to do was bring in black. I didn't have to bring in all the colors that I stamped things in. But in terms of kind of surface richness, the utilization of hue and all the things that kind of define color, temperature, intensity, value, it all can potentially add up to a much richer end result in terms of just a piece that has just simply more range. Doesn't mean that it's, you know, a monochromatic one just in black and white can't be equally or more dramatic or something like that, but just in terms of the visual language that's happening within the piece, it's, you know, there's more potential in, you know, something that utilizes kind of a larger vocabulary in terms of hue. But I do love black and white, though. You know, just real monochromatic things. There's something kind of very dramatic about it. Sometimes kind of going with a more minimalistic range of hue can bring more attention to things like texture, you know, or something like that. Sometimes we're more aware of kind of the remaining visual language that's happening, the more limited it is. So if you want to really emphasize things like texture, then maybe that's when you don't use color or something like that. You kind of limit, you know, some of the other aspects of the some of the other visual aspects of a given piece. Anyways. Isn't it kind of nice, that kind of feeling right around in this area right here? There's a softness to it, or a, I don't know, kind of a, maybe a resonance or something like that. All right, up here it's fairly light, and I don't want to get too dark, but this is where this kind of cosmetic brush really comes into play. I can get kind of a nice soft application of color with this. Okay, in this case it'll just be a little bit of black. Okay, let me remove some of that. I just want to go for a little bit of a kind of a vignette. Light touch, remember? Don't go harder than what you would use on like a toddler's face or something like that. You can do it in repetition, though. Maybe it would irritate them, but we're not actually doing it. I'm just saying that for kind of the to make a point on the kind of the degree to which you're using your various media applicators more so. Okay, I can bring some of this down here as well too. This is one of my favorite tools now, like recent tools, to apply my kind of perimeter vignette. Alright, so here's kind of an example of using hue right now, okay? There's a decent amount of space in this one, but this one looks, I feel much deeper, okay, because we've taken it a little bit further, okay, the much lighter mountain than there is here. Okay. And that's because my green trees were lighter than these gray ones in the background here, so I don't know, I like this too, though. Okay, so let's address my foreground reeds, okay? All right, so here's the reeds that were used in this one right here. Let's do it multi-tonal. Like in the previous lesson, I added some gray ones back in here. So why don't we go with black and green, okay? Or let's make it more interesting. Instead of just going black and green, why don't we do black on here, but let's take our green pen and so if we can add a little bit of green to this, like so. And let's see if we can get some variation. I don't know. Maybe I didn't remove enough. Maybe I did. Who knows? There's a little bit of variation there. Can't see it too much. Okay. Let's do that a couple times, okay? Here, kind of the outside edge. Let's just go with straight black. Okay, now without removing any of that black off there, there's still black on here, but because I just gave it one impression, but let's just go and go with a green on this next impression. So it's kind of mixing with the black, kind of a muted black because it's really dry. And let's come in here. Let's try to hit a little bit of a different angle, though, so, it can perhaps look a little bit deeper. Maybe go for a couple impressions of it. Let's go for even a third impression of it right in here. Can we go for 4? Yeah, we can. All right, so can you see in the foreground where there's both dark and light? This one's the 4th impression right here. But you can see where there's lights and darks within this given space. Dare I go for a 5th impression? Let's try. Yeah, that worked. Okay. Let me get it to focus. Okay, these ones right here are the 5th impression. These ones coming right here, and you can see it a little bit in the background. So, instead of it being kind of just black, okay. It looks like I did stamp some gray into it on that last lesson as an example. Look what we can do in the foreground here. It's pushing depth within kind of a very small space because this represents something that's like, say, 3 feet to 4 feet away from us. So just within that given 1 foot of space or something, whatever it represents, 2 feet or whatever of that bush, we get much more depth. Okay, now what does this look like in the overall scheme of things? That's what you have it right there. So it's not like you're saying, oh my gosh, that's so deep. It's subtle, right? And we get this kind of this illusion of space in here now. Okay. And that's through your use of your kind of an expansion of your tonal range and using impressions selectively. Okay. All right, now let's see here. I might want to do something a little bit more. It's looking. I really like this scene, but I think it could use, I don't know, just something else. Okay, now it's looking maybe a touch anemic. So I tell you what, let's go for something fairly subtle, or we'll start with something very subtle, and we'll see if we like it. We can go more. Here's desert sand, and here's a tea dye, fairly light value, kind of warm, earthy tones. Okay, let's start off with the desert sand. Okay. It's very, very light. Do you see that right there? And that's using a really good saturation. I really pressed down on it hard, okay? But let's blot a little of it off, and let's see if we can add a slight tinge of kind of a warmer hue somewhere. I'm kind of adding it onto my mountain a little bit. It's coming into the blue a little bit too much, so I'll stay away from that. I don't like it where it overlaps the blue too much. It can go in there a little bit, but if it does, I want just kind of a real light amount. Okay, see that right there? That's what it looks like overall. And let's bring some of that into our rocks as well. So it just adds a little bit of a warm tinge in here, which I think is kind of nice. Let's add a little bit into our water. Oops, I'm dragging a little bit of that reed, so I won't go over that too much right now. Let me add a little bit of it here. I think that's enough. Let's try, I don't know if I want the tea dye now. Tea dye might be a little bit too warm. It's a little bit more brownish. Let's see, I really blotted it off here, but maybe I'll add a little bit on my rocks. Okay, that's enough. See, it kind of warmed up a little bit. Same thing up there. Let me see. These are kind of the subtle tweak areas of the piece. Let me go and bring in a little bit of gray into these areas. Oh, okay. Now, since this is our final piece, let me go ahead and just play around with a little bit of alcohol inks right here. Here's a cool gray, number 3. Let's see if I can find one that's even lighter. Well, here's a pale blue. We used gray and blue on our mountain, right? So let's go into it with a little bit of our alcohol inks and we can get kind of much more specific. I'm just kind of going in and I'm darkening some of the darker areas within the design where there's a lot of kind of condensed dots. I'm just kind of adding, I'm not doing it in black or something like that. I'm doing it in a very light gray, pale gray, okay? Because I can get much more specific with, you know, the tip of my pen than I can with a stylus tool. Although the stylus tool is pretty good at getting into some areas when you use the side of it, but still. You know, the pen tip is much more conducive to the extra fine little areas. Same thing down in my water down here. Now, this is very light, so the change is extremely subtle. I mean, I could barely see it happening. But I can go back into my, you know, darker one and work a little darker accordingly. You know, I can get down on the, you know, the bottom side of the rock with these pens and just do a little coloring in. It just makes things a little bit more dimensional many times. You can create separation between rocks and the rocks behind them. Let's try Cool Gray 5. Okay, so the Cool Gray 3 was a certain hue. That one's pretty dark, isn't it? Okay, let's just go right in the shadow areas. Meaning at kind of the bottom side of the rocks. Remember, you can just look on the designs and see where there's a darker area, and I'm just darkening that same dark area of the design, so I don't have to kind of invent lighting or something like that, or shading. You can just kind of reiterate what's already on there. See this rock right here? I can create a little bit of separation by doing some shade on the rock right behind it, like that. Okay? And again, it's on the design, so you don't have to do things in a theoretical kind of manner. You just have to make it visual and observe the design. Okay, so I think this is going to be too dark for this mountain, maybe. Yeah, it's a little bit too dark, so the mark that I just put down, I'll just kind of blend out with my lighter one. And I'll put the that ink right back into solution. Okay, so I don't know, the tea dye, I didn't really need some of that. Maybe, you know, I could have done too is I have, you know, certain colors like, you know, very pale colors, camel or something like that, very light values. That's not that light. Always test. Okay, here's this one. See this apricot there? It's kind of similar to that desert sand that I used in there, so that could have been done as well, you know, if you happen to have some nice light values in pen form. And don't forget to use, you know, your blenders. If it goes on there too thick, then use a blending tool. Okay, so one of the things that I really like about this final piece here in terms of this lesson is I'm not trying to just give a real quick, you know, example of what can be done, although this scene, you know, I don't know, I don't think it took that long. I can kind of finish off in the ways that I like to finish off. Here's some white pigment ink. Okay. And applying with a Q-tip right here. Let's put in some kind of haze and fog coming in the distance there. See, I've left that area light, so I can go into that area like this and add some additional light, and I'm putting it in front of the trees or between them. Because you're saying, you know, first of all, there's trees that are lighter in the distance. You're saying that some light is hitting them. Where this mountain kind of meets some of this light area, where light meets dark, okay? Kind of bringing in some of this light into it. It's actually, you know, when I say light, it's, you know, white pigment ink, and it's just lighter than, you know, the impression, so in a sense it's almost like going into it and using like liquid light or something like that. Not really, but it just kind of creates that nice contrast and texture within there. Don't use too much of this. 100% of people that have a hard time utilizing this application process, that's what I'm going to stay with 100%. Okay, I thought about it. I can't think of another thing. They're just using too much ink on here, or they're adding it in an area that's just too dark and it stands out too much. Okay, it just busts right out. You take it right off. Okay, that's on glossy cardstock. On matte paper, it's, you know, a little bit more permanent, but just be a little bit more methodical and don't, you know, make an example of, you know, putting in a, you know, big blob or something like that. Okay, area up here. Okay, so again, just use a very light touch, and I'm adding it into a light area, so it's not really standing out too much, you know. Okay. There was someone that did some of this on one of their postings in the Facebook, and and someone said, "Hey, how did you, you know, get that? How did you get your fog so nice?" She just said, "Yeah, she just, you know, she just did what Kevin said on the lesson." She said, "Where like two taps, you can't see anything, right?" And I always say that kind of where you kind of start tapping with a couple taps and there's nothing, you know, showing from it. It's because the ink on your applicator is too dry, okay? So watch this. So let's put some of this down here in this, around these rocks. 1, 2. See, nothing. 8, 9, 10. See, I've done 10 taps there and it's starting to show up. Okay, so a little bit more, and see, it's kind of applying. See, right along this rock line right there. See how that is right there? I don't know, 20, 30 taps. Look at this one right here. It's very distinct and crisp, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, nothing, right? Okay, see how it kind of starts creeping in there? That's what the consistency you want. Now, if I know that this area is really light up there and I'm going to be applying a lot of ink, I can, you know, ink up and just take that right in there, and I'm applying a bigger slathering of it. But most of it, the areas. You know, you just kind of want to take things nice and slow with a very dry brush. People, if it's too dry and they go like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, they think, oh, I can't see anything, so they pound it, and then, you know, and then it gets, you know, big thick application of it, which is not what you want. You want control over it. And the slower something kind of develops, the more control you have over it. And it doesn't really make it slower, because when there's too much ink, you end up having to remove too much, you know, because it kind of looks weird. So the less you have to kind of remove, like I just had to do it right now, you know, the faster it's going to go. And I don't think this process takes a long time either. And it can be so effective. Kind of having some kind of meander about through our varied backgrounds like this, and look at how it really looks like lighting in there. Okay. Some people say, oh, okay, you know, with some pieces, and I say this too about other people's pieces, sometimes people's pieces look really realistic, and it's usually kind of their handling of values. It doesn't mean they have to do it in this technique right here either. You know, people use all kind of various media, but it's kind of how things kind of look, you know, in relation to the eye. Things in the distance are a little bit lighter. It's when we kind of do things kind of in a more visual sense of how things would look in the real world. Not that that's, you know, the way I approach all of my scenes. I don't, you know, I don't try to make things kind of photorealistic, although I really like this look right here. That's the thing that's happening. It's when things are kind of done in more of a visual sense of how things really look. Distant things are more lighter and kind of more obscure because it has to have there's a longer distance, you know, from that peak up there, you know, 7, 8 miles away, and it's going through all this moisture in the air, and that image is getting broken up, right, before it gets to our eye. But that's the type of thing, that's the type of kind of convention that people use in order to create that kind of illusion of depth and space that could be considered like more so-called real or realistic. But just in general, to me, I don't know, things that I tend to do in my scenes probably more is instead of say the word realism, you know, I have fun with things like whimsical or mystical, you know, in terms of the types of things that I probably value in my pieces, or the types of things that I'm going for. It's more of like a feeling than light realism. Okay. It's not really something I'm concerned about. I do like it though, but it's not really something I'm kind of striving for in my pieces. I just want to, I don't know, I tend to like to do whatever I want to do rather than to kind of go for anything overly specific. And that's where it allows me to really kind of take the piece in whatever direction it seems to want to go. And I never know where that might be, really. And I don't know, that's the same thing that's happening in this one. I'm not saying that this is kind of a restrictive piece because I really like it. But anyway, I'm kind of adding some more up here. See, in doing this, I'm kind of diluting, well, not diluting, but I'm lightening this background cloud a little bit more, so it's kind of getting pushed back even farther in a visual sense. Okay, because it's, you know, this white pigment ink, it's lightening the impression. stamped impression. Look at that. Doesn't that, you know, that mountain really look kind of far off in the distance now? Okay, so here we have it. You could really use like a fisherman or something like that in there, huh? I'll just keep it like that. It's supposed to be a stamp alongs. I usually do it, you know, kind of less kind of techniques and whatnot, but I really like the way this is going, and I really wanted to emphasize some of those kind of aspects of the different concepts that we've been covering over these last, you know, the previous 2 lessons, kind of going into this one here. But we have an impression starting off, okay, and it's varied. I stamped black, and I stamped some greens into it, and I stamped some blues down below, wiped off the bottom, so it gave me a varied impression, okay. Step number 2 was stamping some background trees. We wanted those trees to be lighter than the darkest parts of the first impression that was going to be in front of it. So we stamped those in a certain green, but we also, I already tossed out the paper that I stamped it, but I gave it an impression first, okay, so this was the second impression, but not only that, I wiped it off from the bottom, so kind of a selective impression, you know, that those trees down there were really wiped off, you know, from the bottom to in a pretty good amount of it was removed up to about midway. So we're talking about 1 inch of ink, you know, fairly substantially wiped off, you know, in this impression and this impression. The mountain in the background was stamped in gray, and I ran some blue into it, but same thing. Remember, I took off some of the ink off the bottom portion, and I don't know, I did some variations on that gray up there, stamped it out, but the grays that I used on here were lighter, or a little bit lighter than the darkest impression of those trees up there, okay? So see, as things kind of move off into the distance, they're getting lighter and lighter and lighter. And I didn't stamp that cloud in, like, say, black or something like that, because it would have been darker than this mountain here, so I had to choose a value that was lighter than that gray, okay? It doesn't mean that it's, you know, it's only because it's high, but usually when you're going higher up in Western perspective, the way that on a historically, you know, Western culture and paintings and whatnot, European, you know, works were, you know, the higher it goes, you know, the farther off in the distance it is. Okay? So, variations in value with each layer of kind of representative distance within the scene. But I did tweak that, okay? And then we've inked it all in using those same colors that we stamped everything out in. And in our foreground, we have different values of some of those hues that were used. So I used some in green and black. And you can see some of that green in there. So there's some difference in value and hue right in the foreground right here. So we've utilized some of those same aspects of depth through value that were used in this whole space right up here in the foreground right here. So it gives us, you know, a little bit more, I don't know, character and depth, and kind of overall it leads to a fairly rich piece, in my opinion. Okay, so here it is, just in kind of grayscale. Actually, that's not the one there. Here, this one was the short. Here's the kind of the closer one right here. So I don't know. It looks a little different here. This one looks good to me too. So we have I don't know, some black and white photographer and someone that uses color right here maybe. And both of them are using that value, but this one just kind of takes it to the I wouldn't say extreme, but takes it a step further with the use of color and the way that we're able to utilize hue for different looks. This one uses a little bit of temperature too in terms of cool colors with a slight tinge of warmth up there. You can see it in the rocks and kind of down in the reflection as well. So, okay, so anyways, In terms of the concepts here, remember, don't let the end result kind of, get you confused. All it is just kind of taking your stamp and just wiping it off, right, before you give the impression. And that's just giving you the foundation. Think about not only using something in one color, but why not use it in, a couple different values just to give you a little bit of extra depth. And that's not hard to do, Stamp it out in green, stamp it out in black, or something, whatever color scheme you're working with. If we were doing a really brilliant golden sunset or something like that with skies ablaze and, golden reds and different, hues like that, oranges, then you can stamp out your reeds down here in like a black and, brown or red or gold, whatever, orange or something related to the lighting within your scene. And it just makes things a little bit richer as a result, and kind of a little bit more sophisticated in terms of your usage of imagery. And it's just simple enough to do. Just utilize the colors that you're already using, but use them, instead of just inking something up and stamping it out, you can ink it up, stamp it, blot it first, and then go for a lighter version of it. So you can really push the limits of all of your existing inks as well to get kind of, a wider range of results from them just by simply using a weaker version of them. So you can use any one of your inks in any color, in theory, from the darkest incarnation of it to white, So here's all the different ranges of it. So in terms of something like this, if I had some of that right behind in here, it just makes it look more full, and it makes it look like you're utilizing kind of more inks, but it's really just the one. Okay, so anyways, I hope that comes in handy for you. If you choose to apply it to your own scenes, I hope that works out for you. And thanks again for watching the lesson and for tuning in to the Stampscapes channel.